Now, continuing the chapter, I thought it best to take him without delay. So, what doctor said? What doctor thought that without any further delay, he would take the dog immediately with him. Right? And when doctor proceeded further, taking the dog in his hand, right, Mrs. Mumphrey followed her from behind. And she was wailing, she was moaning, she was crying, right? I marched out to the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. So Mr. Harriet, the doctor, he wrapped the dog in the blanket and he marched towards, that means stepped towards his car. The entire staff was roused and maids rushed in and out bringing his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions. So entire house became very much active at that time. Why? Because the main member of the family was going out of the house. So all the maids and the servants, right, they started moving here and there, bringing his, things of his need like his day bed, like his night bed, his clothes, his ball, like lunch ball, supper ball. So see what a prosperous dog he was. He have had a different balls for different times of food. Supper ball. Realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. So when doctor realized that my car will not be able to hold all these things at a time, so he started his car immediately. As I moved off, Mrs. Mumphrey with a despairing cry. When the car moved, right, Mrs. Mumphrey cried with despair. Right, she was very much disheartened, as if she was being separated from her own child. But what did she do? She threw an armful of the little coats through the window. Right. So what she did? Right, she threw a handful of coats through the window inside the car. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. So when he took the corner, before completely coming out of the house, right? Doctor glanced at the mirror to see what was the condition of the housemates. Everybody was in tears. Everybody was crying in the house, as if the main member was going out of the house and he was sick. Right? Out on the road, I glanced down at the pathetic little animal gasping on the seat by my side. Doctor said, when I came in the street out of the house, I gave a short look to the animal, to the dog. He was gasping. Gasping means he was not able to breathe properly. Gasping means, right, breathing with very difficulty. That is called gasping. And he was sitting by the side of the doctor, and he was in a pathetic condition, in a very sad condition. I patted the head and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. So what the doctor did, he patted his head. That means slowly patted his head, and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. In response to that, the dog tried to move his tail. Right? Poor old lad is talking about. He's talking about the dog. The poor old lad, right? That kind lad. That means boy. He's calling dog his boy. I said, you have not a kick in you. That means you do not have any energy in you. But I think I know a cure for you. But I think that I know how I have to treat you. At the surgery, the household dogs surged around me. When he reached at his clinic, all the dogs there, they started moving here and there, right? Here and there around the doctor. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes. And Tricky was looking at that group. Pack means group of dogs with dull eyes. Right? He was sick, so there was no energy in his eyes. When put down, lay motionless. When the Tricky was put down on the floor, he stayed there still, motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing around him for a few seconds, other dogs started sniffing him, right? Decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. So all the dogs understood that this dog was sick and he was not a part of their game. So they just ignored him after that. I made up a bed for him in a warm loose box. What he's saying, that in a warm loose box he made a bed for him, right? to the one where the other dogs slept. So where the bed was made, where the other dogs slept. For 2 days I kept an eye on him. For 2 days he was kept under the strict observation, giving him no food but plenty of water. So what doctor did? He stopped giving any solid food. He was kept on the liquid diet, on water. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in the surrounding. Right? So he was not taking any interest earlier because he was very sick. But as his condition started improving, right, he started showing some interest in the surrounding. Right? And on the third, he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. So he started making, very small sound, that is called whimpering. Right? Very small sounds. When he has heard the dogs in the yard, when the dog heard that the dogs are in the yard, he started giving them the response. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound. Greyhound is one of the species of the dog with a very big hair on their body. So when he opened the door, Tricky trotted out. Trotted means he came out. Staggering, not walking properly. He trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe. Joe was another dog. He was a greyhound, right? He totally engulfed. That means cuddled him and his friends. All the group. He was engulfed by the entire group. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the entire group rolled him, inspected him, took a very close look of him. The dogs moved off to down the garden. So all the dogs, after inspecting him, they all moved in the garden down. Tricky followed them. Tricky also went behind them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. And he was rolling slightly with additional fat, extra fat of his body. Later that day, after some time that day, I was present at feeding time. The doctor was present at the feeding time. Right, at the time when the dogs were fed, I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the bowls. So Tristan was one of his assistants. So what he was putting the food in the bowls that were placed there. There was the usual headlong rush followed by the sounds of high-speed eating. Right. So there was a long rush. There was a crowd of dogs, and behind that you can hear they eating this high speed. They were eating very speedily, and that sound could be heard. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. So all the dogs were aware of the fact that they don't have to lag behind while eating. If they will lag behind, right, they will have to face some competition for their last part of the meal, right? Otherwise they will not be able to eat up to their fill. Okay, now next page. When they had finished, Tricky took a walk around the shining balls, looking casually inside one or two of them. So when all the dogs had finished their eating, Tricky also walked around the balls, and like this, that casually, right, he started licking the balls. Next day an extra ball was put out for him, and I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. So next day the ball was placed for Tricky as well. One extra ball was kept there, and the doctor was happy to see that the Tricky was also trying to push the crowd to make his way towards the ball. From then on, his progress was rapid. From that day, he started progressing. There was a rapid speed in his health. Right? He had no medicinal treatment. After that, doctor did not give him any medicinal treatment for any kind. But all day he ran about with the dogs. So entire day he used to run with dogs, joining in their friendly scrimmages, and also join their friendly scrimmages. Right? He discovered the joys of being bowled over, trampled, and squashed every few minutes. So in the group, they were playing like that. They were squashing each other. They walked over each other, squashed each other. So he enjoyed all that play. He became an accepted member of the gang. So the entire gang accepted him very friendly. An unlikely silky little object among the shaggy crew. He was in that shaggy crew he was a silky and little object among the entire crew, fighting like a tiger for his share at the meal time. So he was fighting like a tiger at the time of the meal and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. And at the time of the hunting rats in the old hen house during the night, right? So he had never had such a time in his life. For Tricky, it was a very new experience, right? And a very energetic experience. All the while, Mrs. Mumphrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. But there, Mrs. Mumphrey was not in a very good condition. She was very much anxious, anxiously she was moving here and there in the background of her house, and not one time, not two times, for dozen of times she would call to the doctor and ask for the latest news about the Tricky, latest bulletin about the Tricky. I dodged the questions about whether his cushions were being turned regularly or his correct coat wore according to the weather or not. The doctors very smartly dodged those questions which were asked regarding the change of the cushions and the change of the coat according to the weather, because these things were actually not required. But I was able to able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and convalescing rapidly. But doctor was at least able to tell her that that this dog was out of the danger now, and he is improving very rapidly. Very rapidly he is improving. Okay, that good news he was able to give. The word convalescing, that means improving from a bad condition to a good condition, seemed to do something to Mrs. Mumphrey. Mrs. Mumphrey seemed to have give a very different kind of response to this word. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 24 at a time. So now what she started doing, she started bringing 24 eggs and 12 eggs and a lot of eggs at the time of the meal for the dog, to build up Tricky's, so that she could build his strength. For a happy period of my partner and I had 2 eggs each for breakfast. So this was a good time for doctor as well, because the eggs were coming in a plenty, right? So they were also having a good time. But when the bottles of wine began to arrive, now not only eggs, bottles of wine also began to arrive. The real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household, right? So they realized that what is going to happen when this Tricky will be here, what all kind of things will be keep on coming, right? They all were surprised. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. So why the wine were being brought? To enrich, to prosper Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion. So with these wines, with these eggs and a lot of things, right? So lunchtime become a festive occasion, right? With 2 glasses of wine before and several during the meal. So they all were enjoying with the dog, right? Okay. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution. So all the things were being given, but they all were surprised when finally came what? Brandy, right? Okay, for a few nights the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled and reverently drunk, right? They were days of deep content. So they were amazing days, doctor is saying, right? So there were a lot of wine, a lot of beer and all that, and eggs. Starting well with the extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained by the midday wine, and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. So all kind of things were there to eat and drink. So those were amazing days for doctors. It was a temptation to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest. So to keep Tricky, such a prosperous animal, as a guest, it was a thing of greed. It was a thing of temptation. But doctor is saying, I knew Mrs. Mumphrey was suffering, and after a fortnight felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. So finally, the doctor informed the lady that the dog is out of danger and now he is fit and she can take her anytime. So what happened after that? She came in a car, and when the dog saw her, he jumped from the doctor's lap to his lady, and he started kissing the lady, right? And in this way the lady was very much emotional, and she started crying and thanked the doctor a lot for whatever he has done for Tricky. And this was the triumph, and you can see this was the success of the surgery and the doctor. And doctor was very intelligent. The way he handled the condition, right? This shows his intelligence, and the way he's treated tricky in such a short time, right? It shows that, and it also throws a very, it throws a light on the very deep relationship between the mistress and her dog, right? This this story symbolizes a strong bond of love between the animal and man, human being. Thank you for the chapter. Thank you for listening.